June 26th, 1943. Somewhere over the coast of northern France, 20,000 feet above the English Channel, a burst of 20 cannon fire rips through the canopy of an American fighter. Glass explodes inward. Shrapnel tears through the instrument panel. Oil sprays across the face of a 22-year-old pilot from Lawton, Oklahoma. A kid who 6 months ago was fixing tractor engines on his uncle's farm. His name is Robert S. Johnson. Blood is running down his neck. His left hand is shaking. Behind him, a Focke-Wulf, 190 piloted by one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced killers, is lining up for the finishing shot. The German squeezes the trigger. Cannon shells slam into the fuselage. Again, and again, and again. The entire ammunition load of a frontline German fighter pours into this American aircraft. By every law of aerial combat, written since 1914, this airplane should be falling from the sky in pieces. But it does not fall. It does not break. It keeps flying. When Robert Johnson lands that shattered machine back in England, ground crews will count over 200 holes in the airframe and stop counting because they run out of patience. That aircraft, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, weighs nearly 7 tons, fully loaded. Every pilot in the Luftwaffe called it a joke. Within 12 months, they will call it something else entirely. They will call it the thing that killed the German Air Force. This is the story of the most ridiculous fighter plane ever built, and how it became the most feared weapon in the skies of Europe. But to understand how a flying brick became a killing machine, we need to go back 3 years to a summer when the world was on fire, and one man with an accent nobody could place decided to build something that everyone said was impossible. The year is 1940. In May and June, the German war machine rolls across Western Europe with a speed that stuns military planners on every continent. France, the nation that bled for 4 years in the previous war, collapses in 6 weeks. The Luftwaffe owns the sky. Messerschmitt AOF 109S and the newer Focke-Wulf 190S cut through Allied fighters like wolves through sheep. British Hurricanes fall in flames over Dunkirk. French Devoitines never even get off the ground before Stukas turn their airfields into craters. Norway, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands. All of them watch their air forces destroyed in days, sometimes in hours. Across the Atlantic, American generals study the reports coming out of Europe, and the picture is terrifying. The numbers tell a story of absolute domination. In the Battle of France alone, the Allies lose over 1,400 aircraft in roughly 40 days. The Luftwaffe loses fewer than 500. German pilots are racking up victory counts that seem fictional. Werner Mulders already has over 60 kills. Adolf Galland is climbing fast behind him. These men are not just good. They are the product of years of secret training combat experience in Spain, and aircraft designed by engineers who understood that altitude and speed win fights. American planners realize something that keeps them awake at night. The United States Army Air Corps has nothing that can match these machines at high altitude. The P-39 era Cobra is a decent low-altitude scrapper, but above 15,000 feet, it turns into a flying coffin. The P-40 Warhawk is tough and reliable, but it cannot climb, cannot compete above 20,000 feet, and its engine chokes in thin air. If America enters this war, and every strategist in Washington knows it is a matter of when, not if, American pilots will be flying into a sky controlled by the most lethal air force in history, with fighters that cannot reach the altitudes where the real killing happens. The Army Air Corps issues an emergency requirement. They need a high-altitude fighter with devastating firepower, extreme range, and the ability to survive punishment that would destroy anything currently in service. They need it fast, and they need it to be unlike anything that has ever flown before. Several companies submit proposals, but one man working out of a factory on Long Island, New York, looks at the requirement and sees something that nobody else sees. His name is Alexander Kartveli. He is not American by birth. Born in Tbilisi, Georgia, in 1896, Kartveli grew up in the shadow of the Russian Empire, studied engineering in Paris, and arrived in the United States in the 1920s with nothing but a suitcase and a head full of ideas that most people considered eccentric. By 1940, he is the chief designer at Republic Aviation, a company that most aviation insiders consider second tier compared to giants like Curtiss or North American. Kartveli is quiet, intense, and stubborn in a way that makes his colleagues nervous. He does not argue. He simply builds what he believes is correct and waits for reality to prove him right. When Kartveli studies the Army's specification, he reaches a conclusion that shocks his own engineering team. Every other designer in America is trying to build a lighter, faster, more agile fighter. Kartveli decides to do the exact opposite. He will build the biggest, heaviest single-engine fighter the world has ever seen. His logic is ruthless and simple. At high altitude, agility means nothing. Thin air robs wings of lift and engines of power. What matters at 30,000 feet is raw horsepower, structural strength, and the ability to carry enough weapons to destroy anything in a single pass. Kartveli selects the Pratt Whitney R-2800 double wasp engine, a monster radial that produces over 2,000 horsepower, with its turbocharger spinning at full capacity. This engine is so large that the entire forward section of the aircraft must be designed around it. The turbocharger ducting runs from the engine at the front all the way to the belly of the aircraft near the tail, creating a complex system of pipes and intercoolers that adds hundreds of pounds of weight, but gives the fighter something no other American plane possesses: the ability to breathe at altitudes where German engines begin to starve. Then, Kartveli adds the weapons, not 4 machine guns, not 6. 8 Browning M250 caliber heavy machine guns, 4 in each wing with enough ammunition for approximately 30 seconds of continuous fire. 30 seconds does not sound like much until you understand what 8 50 caliber guns firing simultaneously actually means. Each gun sends out 13 rounds per second. 8 guns together produce over 100 rounds per second. Every bullet weighs nearly 2 ounces and travels at almost 3,000 feet per second. The combined firepower creates a cone of destruction that can saw the wing off a bomber, shred an engine block, or turn a locomotive into scrap metal from half a mile away. When the prototype, designated XP-47B, is rolled out of the factory, the reaction is immediate and almost universal. It is enormous. It is the largest single-seat fighter anyone has ever built. Wingspan of over 40 feet, gross weight pushing 7 tons. Pilots who are used to climbing into sleek Spitfires and nimble Zeros look at this machine and see something that belongs on a runway at a cargo terminal, not in a dogfight. The nicknames start immediately. The Jug, short for Juggernaut. The Flying Milk Bottle. The 7-ton milk truck. Republic Aviation's own test pilots approach it with visible unease. But Kartveli is not interested in opinions. He is interested in physics. When the XP-47B takes its first flight on May 6, 1941, something unexpected happens. Despite its enormous weight, the aircraft climbs. It climbs well. At 15,000 feet, it is fast. At 20,000, it is faster. At 25,000, where most American fighters are gasping and sluggish, the Thunderbolt is still accelerating. At 30,000 feet in air, so thin that a man without oxygen would lose consciousness in seconds, the P-47 reaches speeds above 400 miles per hour. In a dive, it approaches 500. No Allied fighter in existence can touch those numbers at those altitudes, and no German fighter, not even the feared FW-190, can match it above 25,000 feet. Kartveli has done exactly what he promised. He has built a fighter that trades elegance for endurance, agility for annihilation, and beauty for raw industrial brutality. The Army orders it into mass production. But between the factory floor and the battlefield lies a gap filled with blood. Training squadrons begin receiving the P-47 in late 1942, and the aircraft immediately starts killing the men who are supposed to fly it. The torque from that massive engine pulls the plane violently to the left on takeoff. Inexperienced pilots lose control on the runway. The aircraft ground loops cartwheels and crashes with horrifying regularity. In the air, the Thunderbolt's weight makes it unforgiving of mistakes. Stall it at low altitude, and there is no recovery. Dozens of pilots die in training accidents before a single P-47 ever sees combat in Europe. Instructors begin calling it the pilot killer. Some officers quietly recommend canceling the program. Morale in the training squadrons drops to dangerous lows. Young aviators who volunteered to fight the Luftwaffe find themselves fighting their own airplane first. But Kartvelli's design has a secret that only combat will reveal. The pilots who survive their training, who learn to respect the aircraft's weight and harness its power, begin to notice something remarkable. The P-47 is nearly indestructible. Its radial engine can absorb bullets that would shatter a liquid-cooled Merlin or a Daimler-Benz. A single rifle-caliber round through a Bf-109's coolant line will kill the engine in minutes. The same round, hitting the P-47's radial engine, might knock out one of 18 cylinders, and the engine will keep running on the other 17. The airframe is built like a bridge. Spars are thicker, skin panels are heavier, control cables are redundant. The self-sealing fuel tanks can take hits and keep the aircraft from becoming a fireball. In early 1943, the 56th Fighter Group and the 78th Fighter Group arrive in England with their Thunderbolts. The Luftwaffe greets them with confident aggression. In the first weeks of combat over occupied Europe, the results are humiliating for the Americans. German pilots, veterans with hundreds of sorties, run circles around the new arrivals. The P-47 cannot turn with the FW-190. It cannot climb with the Bf-109 at medium altitudes. In the opening engagements, the Americans lose aircraft while scoring almost no kills. Luftwaffe intelligence reports dismissed the Thunderbolt with contempt. Too big, too heavy, too slow. The Americans have made a catastrophic miscalculation. But something is happening that the Germans do not yet understand. The P-47s that get hit keep coming home. Aircraft that take damage which would destroy a Spitfire or a Messerschmitt land safely in England with their pilots alive. Those pilots learn. Every mission teaches them what the Thunderbolt can do and what it cannot. They stop trying to turn fight. They start climbing higher. They begin to use the one advantage that no German fighter can answer: the devastating, unstoppable, physics-defying dive. 30,000 feet. A P-47 in a full power dive reaches speeds that compress the air around its wings. Nothing in the Luftwaffe inventory can follow it down. Nothing can escape it coming up. The strategy that will change the air war over Europe is about to be born. Commanders like Hub Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group are already drawing it up on chalkboards in English briefing rooms. They call it boom and zoom. Climb to the ceiling, wait, pick your target, roll over, dive like a meteor. Fire 8 guns into the enemy at closing speeds that give him less than 2 seconds to react. Pull up, climb, do it again. It is not elegant, it is not romantic. It is industrial killing applied to aerial combat, and it is about to turn the Luftwaffe's world upside down. But the P-47 has only proven it can survive. It has not yet proven it can dominate. That proof is coming. And when it arrives in the skies over Schweinfurt and Regensburg in the autumn of 1943, it will arrive with a violence that rewrites the rules of air warfare forever. In Part 2, we will witness the moment the Thunderbolt stops being a joke and becomes the single deadliest fighter bomber in the European theater. The moment when German aces with 200 victories meet a 7-ton American monster and discover that experience, skill, and courage are no longer enough to survive. In Part 1, a Georgian immigrant named Alexander Kartvelli built the biggest, heaviest, most ridiculous single-engine fighter the world had ever seen. The P-47 Thunderbolt weighed 7 tons, carried 8 50 caliber machine guns, and was laughed at by every Luftwaffe pilot who saw it. But after Robert Johnson survived over 200 hits and flew his shattered Thunderbolt home across the English Channel, the laughter started to fade. The Americans had proven the P-47 could survive anything the Germans threw at it. They had proven it could dive faster than any fighter in Europe. They had proven its 8 guns could tear an aircraft apart in a single burst. But surviving is not the same as winning. And in the summer of 1943, the 8th Air Force is losing the air war over Europe by every measurable standard. American bomber losses are climbing toward numbers that threaten to break the entire strategic bombing campaign. On the mission to Schweinfurt on August 17, 1943, the 8th Air Force sends 230 B-17 Flying Fortresses deep into Germany to destroy the ball-bearing factories that keep the German war machine turning. 60 bombers do not come back. 60, that is 600 men killed, captured, or missing in a single afternoon. The reason is brutally simple. The P-47 does not have enough fuel to escort the bombers all the way to the target. Its internal tanks run dry roughly 175 miles from the English coast. After that point, the bombers fly alone into a sky filled with German fighters, who know exactly where the American escort turns back. Luftwaffe commanders have timed it to the minute. The moment the Thunderbolts waggle their wings and bank toward England, the German interceptors attack. It is a slaughter repeated mission after mission, week after week. And the man who understands this problem better than anyone is not a general. He is not a politician. He is a 38-year-old fighter group commander from Missoula, Montana, named Hubert Zemke, and he is furious. Zemke is the commanding officer of the 56th Fighter Group, the first unit in the European theater to fly the P-47 in combat. His pilots call him Hub. The Germans call him something less polite. Zemke is not a desk officer. He flies combat missions with his men. He has seen what happens when the escorts turn back. He has listened to bomber crews describe the carnage that follows. He has read the after-action reports stacked on his desk. Each one a catalog of burning aircraft and dead friends, and he has reached a conclusion that puts him on a direct collision course with the men running the 8th Air Force from behind desks in England. The problem, Zemke believes, is not the P-47. The problem is how the brass is using the P-47. Current doctrine requires American fighters to stay glued to the bomber formations, weaving back and forth above them in close escort. This means the Thunderbolts burn fuel, flying at the bomber's slow speed, wasting the one advantage that makes the P-47 lethal: altitude and energy. Zemke wants to unleash his fighters. He wants to send them ahead of the bombers, climbing to 30,000 feet, hunting the German formations before they can organize their attacks. He wants his pilots to fight the way the Thunderbolt was designed to fight. High, fast, aggressive, and without the leash that ties them to formations of lumbering B-17s. He presents his case to 8th Fighter Command Headquarters. The response is a wall of institutional resistance that nearly ends his career. Brigadier General Frank O'Driscoll Hunter, who commands the fighter units, is a World War I veteran who believes fighters exist to protect bombers, period. Fighters do not go hunting. Fighters do not leave the formation. Fighters stay close and defend. When Zemke argues that close escort is getting bomber crews killed because the P-47S waste fuel and energy flying slowly instead of attacking Hunter's staff, dismisses him. One senior officer tells Zemke directly that his job is to follow orders, not to reinvent fighter doctrine. Another warns him that continued insubordination will result in his removal from command. Zemke's after-action reports, filled with detailed tactical analysis and specific recommendations, are filed and ignored. Meanwhile, the losses keep climbing. In the week of October 8th through 14, 1943, the 8th Air Force launches a series of deep penetration raids into Germany that become known as Black Week. 148 bombers are shot down in 7 days. Over 1,500 airmen are killed or captured. The bombing campaign is on the verge of collapse. Replacement crews arriving in England hear the statistics and understand that their odds of completing a 25-mission tour are mathematically close to zero. But Zemke finds an ally that nobody expects. His name is Major General William Kepner, and in January 1944, he takes over 8th Fighter Command from the retired Hunter. Kepner is a different breed of officer. He is a former enlisted man who earned his wings the hard way, a pilot who flew observation balloons in World War I, survived being shot down, and clawed his way through 2 decades of peacetime military bureaucracy to reach general rank. Kepner does not care about tradition. He cares about results, And the results he sees when he reviews the 8th Air Force's loss statistics make his blood run cold. Within days of taking command, Kepner calls Zemke and the other fighter group commanders to a meeting at 8 Fighter Command headquarters at Bushy Hall in Hertfordshire, England. The room is tense. These men have been fighting a two-front war, one against the Luftwaffe and another against their own leadership for nearly a year. Kepner does not waste time. He looks at the assembled commanders and says something that changes the air war over Europe in a single sentence. Your job is no longer to stay with the bombers. Your job is to destroy the German Air Force, wherever you find it, in the air, on the ground. I don't care how. Find them and kill them. The room goes silent for 3 full seconds. Then, Hub Zemke starts grinning. Kepner has just torn up the old rulebook and handed the fighter pilots exactly what Zemke has been demanding for months. The P-47 is off the leash. But words from a general mean nothing if the aircraft cannot reach the enemy. The Thunderbolt's range problem is still critical. Without more fuel, the P-47 still turns back before the bombers reach their targets, and the Luftwaffe still attacks in the gap. The solution comes from an engineering modification so simple that it borders on embarrassing. Drop tanks. External fuel tanks made of pressed paper and resin cheap enough to mass-produce light enough to carry under the wings and designed to be jettisoned the moment a fight begins. The concept is not new. The Luftwaffe has been using drop tanks since 1940. The RAF has used them in the Pacific. But American logistics and doctrine have resisted their widespread adoption in Europe, partly because of supply chain complications, and partly because some commanders believe that external tanks compromise the fighter's performance too much to be practical. Kepner overrides every objection. He orders drop tanks, manufactured and distributed to every P-47 unit in England within weeks. Republic Aviation's engineers design a 75-gallon belly tank, then a 108-gallon model, then a massive 150-gallon tank that extends the Thunderbolt's combat radius to over 425 miles from base. The math changes overnight. With a 150-gallon tank, the P-47 can escort bombers past the German border. Not all the way to Berlin, not yet, but deep enough to cover the most dangerous segments of the route, where Luftwaffe interceptors concentrate their attacks. February 1944. The moment of truth. General Jimmy Doolittle, the new commander of the 8th Air Force, launches Operation Argument, a coordinated series of massive bombing raids against the German aircraft industry. The operation will later be called Big Week, and it represents the largest aerial offensive in history up to that point. Over the course of 6 days, from February 20th to 25, the 8th Air Force sends more than 3,000 bomber sorties deep into Germany. But this time, something is fundamentally different. This time the Thunderbolts go with them, not as escorts chained to the bomber stream, not as passive defenders circling overhead. The P-47s go forward, as hunters racing ahead of the formations at 30,000 feet, drop tanks, full 8 guns loaded with a single order burned into every pilot's brain, find the Luftwaffe and destroy it before it reaches the bombers. February 20th, 1944. Dawn over eastern England. Frost covers the hard stands at Halesworth and Boxted and Duxford. Ground crews have been working through the night fueling aircraft, loading ammunition belts, bolting drop tanks to pylons. The pilots file into briefing rooms and see the maps. Red ribbons stretch from England across the North Sea over the Netherlands into the heart of Germany. Leipzig, Bernburg, Oschersleben. Aircraft factories deep in enemy territory. The room is quiet. Every man in it knows what these targets mean. They mean the Luftwaffe will fight. Not with scattered patrols, not with cautious probes, but with everything. The Germans cannot allow their factories to burn. They will send every fighter they have. The weather report is terrible. Heavy cloud cover across the continent, freezing temperatures at altitude, visibility near zero over most of the route. Several bomber groups abort, but the fighters launch. Over 500 P-47s climb into the gray English sky and turn east. At 28,000 feet, the temperature outside the canopy is minus 40 degrees. Pilots breathe through oxygen masks that frost over if they exhale too hard. Windshields ice up. Instruments fog. The turbocharged engines of the Thunderbolts roar at full power, dragging those 7-ton machines through air so thin that a man standing outside would be dead in 90 seconds. They cross the Dutch coast, then the German border. The drop tanks run dry and tumble away, spinning toward the frozen earth below. Now, the P-47s are running on internal fuel alone. The clock is ticking. Somewhere ahead, the Luftwaffe is climbing to meet the bombers, and then the radio explodes. Bandits, 11 o'clock high, 50 plus. The German interceptors appear as a swarm of dark specks against the white cloud deck. Bf-109S and FW-190S, dozens of them organized into Sturmgruppen, heavily armed assault formations designed to break through the escort screen and tear into the bombers with massed cannon fire. These are not rookies. Many of them carry over 100 missions. Some are aces, with 40, 50, 60 victories. They have been killing American bombers for a year, and they are confident. Hub Zemke's voice crackles across the radio of the 56th Fighter Group. Zemke's Wolfpack drop tanks arm guns. Let's go. 500 Thunderbolts roll over and dive. The physics are instantaneous and devastating. A 7-ton P-47 in a 45-degree dive accelerates past 500 miles per hour in seconds. The 850 caliber guns begin firing at 600 yards. Each gun produces a recoil force of over 500 pounds. 8 guns together generate 4,000 pounds of rearward thrust, so much force that the aircraft physically decelerates when the trigger is pressed. The first German formation never sees what hits it. A flight of 4 Bf-109S climbing in formation is struck from above and behind by 8 converging streams of armor-piercing incendiary ammunition. The lead Messerschmitt loses its entire right wing. The second explodes as rounds pierce its fuel tank. The third rolls inverted and dives, trailing black smoke. The fourth pilot, in a moment of desperate instinct, brakes hard, left directly into the gun sight of a second Thunderbolt. He vanishes in a ball of orange fire. Across a front stretching from the Zuider Zee to the Harz Mountains, the same scene repeats. German formations that have spent months perfecting their anti-bomber tactics suddenly find themselves under attack from above before they can reach the bomber stream. The Thunderbolts are faster. They are higher, and their firepower is overwhelming. In the confused, swirling dogfights that erupt across the German sky, something becomes terrifyingly clear to the Luftwaffe pilots. The Americans are not defending anymore. They are hunting. A veteran German pilot later describes the experience in a post-war interview. "We climbed to attack the bombers as we always did. But this time the fighters did not stay with the bombers. They came at us, from above, from the sun, from everywhere. We could not organize. We could not form up. Every time a Staffel tried to assemble for an attack, the Thunderbolts hit it before it could reach the bombers. It was no longer a battle. It was a massacre." The numbers from Big Week confirm the transformation. Over the 6 days of Operation Argument, the Luftwaffe loses an estimated 355 aircraft in aerial combat. More critically, it loses over 100 experienced fighter pilots, men who cannot be replaced because Germany's accelerated training program is producing pilots with barely 90 hours of total flight time. American losses are significant: 226 bombers and 28 fighters, but every lost aircraft is replaced within days. Every lost pilot is replaced by a fresh graduate with over 200 hours of training. The industrial math is merciless. Kepner's unleashed fighters have done more than protect the bombers. They have begun the systematic destruction of the Luftwaffe as a fighting force. But the Thunderbolt's transformation is not complete. The P-47 has proven it can dominate at high altitude. It has proven it can kill German fighters. Now it is about to prove something even more devastating. In the weeks following Big Week, as Allied planners finalize the details of Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, someone at Tactical Air Command looks at the Thunderbolt and sees not just a fighter, but a weapon platform capable of something no other Allied aircraft can do as effectively. The same machine that kills fighters at 30,000 feet can also kill tanks at 50 feet. The same 8 guns that shred Messerschmitts can shred armored vehicles, trains, bridges, fuel depots, and ammunition dumps. And with bomb racks added under the wings, the P-47 can carry 1,000 pounds of high explosives to the target, drop them with surprising accuracy, and then strafe whatever survives. The Thunderbolt is about to become the deadliest ground attack aircraft of the European war. And when 500 of them descend on the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, the German army is going to discover something that the Luftwaffe already knows but cannot bring itself to admit. The 7-ton joke has become the most terrifying weapon in the Allied arsenal. And in Part 3, we will see what happens when that weapon is pointed not at the sky, but at the ground. When columns of German tanks, trucks, and soldiers discover that there is no place to hide from the monster overhead. And when the Thunderbolt earns a new name, whispered by terrified Wehrmacht soldiers in the hedgerows of France der Jabos. The fighter bomber that turned the roads of Normandy into graveyards. The war in the sky has been won. The war on the ground is about to begin. In Part 1, a Georgian immigrant named Alexander Kartveli designed a 7-ton fighter that every pilot in the Luftwaffe called a joke. In Part 2, commanders like Hub Zemke and William Kepner ripped up the old rulebook-strapped drop tanks to the Thunderbolt's belly and unleashed it as a hunter that tore the Luftwaffe apart during Big Week, destroying 355 German aircraft in 6 days and killing over 100 irreplaceable veteran pilots. The P-47 had conquered the sky. But at the end of Part 2, we saw something new. Allied planners looked at the Thunderbolt and realized it could do more than kill fighters at 30,000 feet. It could kill everything on the ground. Bomb racks under the wings, 1,000 pounds of high explosives, 8 50 caliber guns pointed at columns of tanks, trucks, and men. The word spread through Wehrmacht intelligence channels in the spring of 1944 like a disease. The Americans were turning their heavy fighter into a ground attack weapon. And German soldiers were about to learn what Luftwaffe pilots already knew. There is no place to hide from a 7-ton monster diving out of the sun. This is no longer an experiment. This is annihilation on an industrial scale. By May 1944, German intelligence officers on the Western Front began filing reports that carried a new tone. Not alarm. Something deeper. Something closer to dread. Reconnaissance flights over southern England revealed hundreds of P-47s lined up on airfields across East Anglia and the Midlands, many of them fitted with bomb shackles that had not been there 3 months earlier. Luftwaffe analysts understood immediately what those bomb racks meant. The Americans were not simply building a bigger escort force. They were creating a fighter-bomber fleet of unprecedented scale. Field Marshal Hugo Sperl, commanding Luftwaffe 3 in France, requested an emergency assessment. The report that landed on his desk was devastating. Allied fighter-bomber sorties over France had increased by 340% between January and May 1944. German supply convoys that once moved freely by daylight were now being destroyed at a rate of 12 to 15 vehicles per Thunderbolt sortie. Rail lines within 200 miles of the French coast were being cut faster than repair crews could fix them. Fuel depots were burning. Ammunition dumps were exploding. Bridge after bridge was dropping into rivers across Normandy and Brittany. Sperl ordered a tactical response. German convoys would move only at night. Anti-aircraft batteries would be doubled along major supply routes. Fighter patrols would prioritize intercepting the Jabos, the fighter bombers, before they reached their targets. But the math was impossible. By May 1944, the Luftwaffe in France had fewer than 300 operational fighters. The Allies had over 5,000, and more than 1,500 of them were Thunderbolts configured for ground attack. For every German fighter that rose to intercept 10 American fighters, weighted above to destroy it. Sperl's pilots were not fighting a battle. They were fighting extinction. German ground commanders adapted with the desperation of men who understood their survival depended on invisibility. Tanks were hidden under haystacks and in barns. Trucks moved through forests along paths invisible from the air. Soldiers learned to freeze in place when they heard the distinctive growl of the R-2800 engine, because any movement on an open road was a death sentence. a Wehrmacht officer captured near Caen, later told his interrogators something that revealed the psychological destruction the Thunderbolt had inflicted. "We did not fear your infantry. We did not fear your artillery. We feared your jabos. Every hour, every day. Even when we could not see them, we heard them. And when we heard them, we knew someone was about to die." But the Thunderbolt's transformation into a ground attack weapon created a crisis that nobody anticipated. Fighter pilots, trained to duel at 30,000 feet, were now being ordered to fly at treetop level into walls of anti-aircraft fire. The skill set was completely different. At high altitude, the threats were other fighters. At 50 feet, the threats were everywhere. Light flak guns, hidden machine gun positions, cables strung between poles, church steeples, power lines, and the ground itself. A pilot diving at 400 miles per hour had less than 3 seconds to identify a target aimfire and pull up before impacting the Earth. The losses were immediate and severe. In the weeks before D-Day, 9th Air Force P-47 groups conducting ground attack missions lost aircraft at rates that exceeded anything seen in the high-altitude escort role. The 365th Fighter Group lost 11 aircraft in its first 2 weeks of intensive ground operations. The 368th lost 9. Pilots who had survived dozens of aerial combats were killed by a single burst of 20 mm flak they never saw coming. Voices inside the Army Air Forces began questioning the entire concept. Was it worth risking a highly trained fighter pilot and a 7-ton aircraft to destroy a single truck? Would dedicated light bombers like the A-20 or A-26 be more cost-effective? A colonel at 9th Air Force Headquarters wrote a memo arguing that the P-47's losses in ground attack were unsustainable and strategically unjustifiable. The memo reached Generals Quesada and Wayland, the tactical air commanders responsible for supporting the ground invasion. For a brief, dangerous moment, the Thunderbolt's new role hung in the balance. The doubters pointed to the numbers. The losses were real. The risk was enormous. But then June 6, 1944 arrived. And every argument against the fighter bomber died on the beaches of Normandy. D-Day, 0630 hours. The first waves of American infantry hit Omaha Beach and walked into a killing field. German machine guns and concrete bunkers rake the sand. Mortar rounds explode among men who have nowhere to hide. The carefully planned naval bombardment has missed most of the fortified positions. Within the first hour, casualties on Omaha reach catastrophic levels. Companies that landed with 200 men are reduced to 30. The assault is stalling. Officers on the beach radio desperately for help. Above them, the sky is stacked with Thunderbolts. More than 500 P-47s from the 9th Air Force Patrol, the invasion front organized into rolling waves that provide continuous coverage from dawn until dark. The first calls for close air support reach the fighter bomber squadrons at 0700, 8 P-47s from the 366th Fighter Group Bank toward Omaha Beach. Below them, through gaps in the smoke and cloud, the pilots can see the chaos. Burning landing craft, bodies in the surf, tracers arcing from the bluffs. The flight leader rolls in. His Thunderbolt drops from 3,000 feet to 200 in seconds. The beach rushes up at 400 miles per hour. He can see the gun emplacements now. Dark slits in the hillside muzzle, flashes winking like evil stars. He presses the trigger. 8 50 caliber guns send a stream of armor-piercing rounds into the concrete position. Dust and debris explode outward. The guns stop firing. He pulls up the G-forces, crushing him into his seat, and his wingman is already diving on the next position. 8 Thunderbolts make 12 passes in 20 minutes. 3 machine gun nests are silenced. A mortar position is destroyed. And the ammunition storage point explodes with a blast that soldiers on the beach feel in their chests from 400 yards away. The infantry begins to move. One sergeant, pinned behind a steel obstacle, for 45 minutes later, writes in a letter home that the moment the Thunderbolts arrived was the moment he believed he might survive the day. Along the entire Normandy front, the pattern repeats. At Utah Beach, P-47s destroy a battery of 88 mm guns that has been shelling the landing zones. At Pointe du Hoc, Thunderbolts suppressed German reinforcements, attempting to counterattack the Rangers, clinging to the cliff top. Inland, along every road leading toward the beaches, fighter bombers hunt German columns trying to reach the coast. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, ordered to move from Toulouse to Normandy, a distance of roughly 450 miles, takes 17 days to make the journey. A trip that should have taken 3 days is stretched to nearly 3 weeks, because every time the division moves in daylight, Thunderbolts find it. Tanks burn, trucks explode. Half-tracks are shredded by 50 caliber rounds that punch through their thin armor like paper. The division arrives at the front with 30% of its vehicles destroyed, and its soldiers in a state of psychological exhaustion that no amount of SS training can overcome. By the end of June 1944, the statistics tell a story of absolute dominance. Allied fighter bombers with the P-47, leading in both sortie count and ordnance delivered, have destroyed or damaged over 3,000 German vehicles in Normandy. Rail traffic within 100 miles of the front has been reduced to less than 10% of its pre-invasion volume. The Luftwaffe, which managed to fly barely 319 sorties on D-Day against over 14,600 Allied sorties, has effectively ceased to exist as a factor in the battle. German commanders cannot move troops in daylight. They cannot resupply their forward positions. They cannot concentrate armor for counterattacks. Every road in Normandy belongs to the Thunderbolt from sunrise to sunset. The news from Normandy spreads through the Allied military establishment like adrenaline through a bloodstream. Tactical air power, once dismissed by ground commanders as a sideshow, is now recognized as the decisive factor in the battle for France. General Omar Bradley, commanding the American ground forces, states publicly that the fighter bombers have made the breakout from Normandy possible. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, not a man known for praising Americans, acknowledges that Allied air superiority has paralyzed the German ability to respond. But it is on the German side that the impact is most devastating. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding Army Group B in Normandy, writes a report to Hitler in late June that amounts to a death sentence for the German position in France. The enemy's complete command of the air makes any movement in the battle area impossible. Our losses in men and material are extraordinary. The morale of our troops suffers heavily from the constant threat of fighter-bomber attack. Rommel is not exaggerating. 9th Air Force P-47 groups are now flying an average of 200 sorties per day over Normandy. A single fighter group can put 48 Thunderbolts over a target area within an hour of receiving a request. German units that once measured their combat effectiveness in tanks and artillery pieces now measure it in hours of daylight movement they can risk before the Jabos find them. The answer, increasingly, is zero. When Operation Cobra launches on July 25, 1944, breaking the American forces out of the Normandy hedgerow country. The Thunderbolt plays a role so devastating that German survivors struggle to describe it. Over 500 fighter bombers, the majority of them P-47s, carpet the German defensive line with bombs and napalm before the ground assault begins. An entire Panzerlehr division, one of Germany's elite armored formations, is caught in the open and destroyed as a fighting force in a single afternoon. Its commander, General Fritz Bayerlein, reports that 70% of his troops are killed wounded, or in a state of shock so severe they cannot fight. The breakout that follows shatters the German line in Normandy and leads to the Falaise Pocket in August, where an estimated 10,000 German soldiers are killed and 50,000 captured in a trap that P-47s help seal from the air. Pilots, flying over the Falaise Gap, describe the roads below as graveyards of metal and flesh choked with destroyed vehicles stretching for miles in every direction. For the men who designed the Thunderbolt, the vindication is absolute. Alexander Kartvel's 7-ton monster, the aircraft that was too big, too heavy, too slow, too ugly, has become the most effective fighter bomber in the history of aerial warfare. Republic Aviation's factories in Farmingdale, New York, and Evansville, Indiana, are now producing P-47 Thunderbolts at a rate of over 600 per month. Total production will eventually reach 15,600 and 86 aircraft, more than any other American fighter in history. The Thunderbolt serves in every theater of the war. In the Pacific, P-47's flyground attack missions over the Philippines and Okinawa. In the Mediterranean, they support the advance through Italy. In China-Burma, India, they strafe Japanese supply lines in some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. But it is in Europe, in the skies above France and Germany, that the P-47 earns its immortality. Over 746 Thunderbolt pilots become aces. The 56th Fighter Group, Zemke's Wolfpack, finishes the war as the highest-scoring fighter group in the 8th Air Force with over 674 aerial victories. Francis Gabreski, a Polish-American kid from Oil City, Pennsylvania, scores 28 kills to become the leading American ace in Europe. Robert Johnson, the young Oklahoman who survived 200 hits over France, he finishes with 27 confirmed victories and returns home as one of the most decorated pilots in the Army Air Forces. Hub Zemke receives the recognition that eluded him. During the bitter months of institutional resistance, promoted and honored as one of the architects of American air superiority. But behind these victories and statistics lies a question that history has not yet fully answered. What happened to Alexander Kartveli, the quiet Georgian who designed the machine that changed the war? What happened to the factory workers, the mechanics, the armorers, the nameless thousands who built, maintained, and armed 15,000 Thunderbolts? And what is the real legacy of this aircraft, not just in the history of warfare, but in the way nations think about power industry and the price of survival? The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt has one final chapter. It is not about combat. It is not about victories or statistics. It is about what happens when the guns fall silent, and the world must decide what to remember and what to forget. In Part 4, we will confront the human cost, the forgotten names, the lessons that military planners carried into the Cold War and beyond, and the single most important truth that this 7-ton monster taught the 20th century about the nature of strength. That chapter is the one most people have never heard. And it begins the moment the last Thunderbolt lands for the final time. A Georgian immigrant who arrived in America with nothing but a suitcase and a mind full of ideas that everyone called crazy. A 7-ton fighter that every pilot in the Luftwaffe dismissed as a flying joke. A doctrine rewritten by stubborn commanders who refused to accept that the old rules were killing their own men. A ground attack weapon that turned the roads of Normandy into graveyards and broke the spine of the German army in France. Over 3 parts and 70 minutes, we have watched the P-47 Thunderbolt evolve from the most ridiculed fighter in the sky to the most feared weapon in the Allied arsenal. We have seen it survive 200 hits and keep flying. We have seen it destroy 355 German aircraft in 6 days during Big Week. We have seen it paralyze an entire army in Normandy, turning daylight itself into a death sentence for the Wehrmacht. But at the end of Part 3, we asked a question that the battlefield cannot answer. What happened to the people behind this machine? What happened to Alexander Kartveli, to Hub Zemke, to Robert Johnson, to the thousands of nameless workers who built 15,000 Thunderbolts? Because this story has a final twist, and it is not about combat. It is about what victory costs the people who create it. On May 8, 1945, the men who flew the Thunderbolt scattered like sparks from a dying fire. Some became legends. Most became ghosts. Robert S. Johnson, the 24-year-old from Oklahoma, who survived 200 hits over France and finished the war with 27 confirmed kills, came home to a nation that celebrated him briefly and then moved on. He left the military, took a job with Republic Aviation as a test pilot and sales representative, and spent decades selling the next generation of aircraft to the Air Force. He rarely spoke publicly about the war. Friends said he carried the memories quietly, the way a man carries a wound that healed on the surface but never stopped aching underneath. He died in 1998 at the age of 77, and his obituary in most newspapers was shorter than the list of holes ground crews counted in his aircraft that June morning in 1943. Francis Gabreski, the Polish-American kid who became the leading American ace in Europe with 28 victories, had a different fate. On July 20th, 1944, just weeks after D-Day, Gabreski's propeller clipped the ground during a strafing run over a German airfield. The impact destroyed his aircraft. He spent the rest of the war in Stalag Luftwaffe, a prisoner. He never saw the final triumph of the weapon he had mastered. After liberation, Gabreski returned to active service, flew jets, and Korea scored 6.5 more aerial victories to become one of only 7 American pilots to achieve ace status in 2 wars, and retired as a colonel. He died in 2002, honored but never quite as famous as the men who flew Mustangs and Corsairs forever, in the shadow of aircraft that looked better in photographs. Hub Zemke, the commander who fought his own generals as fiercely as he fought the Luftwaffe, suffered perhaps the cruelest irony. On October 30th, 1944, while leading the 479th Fighter Group on a mission over Germany, Zemke's P-51 Mustang, not a Thunderbolt, broke apart in severe turbulence during a storm. He survived the bailout, but was captured and spent the remaining months of the war as a prisoner in Stalag Luftwaffe, the same camp that held Gabreski. The man who had done more than almost anyone to prove the P-47's worth in combat never flew one again after the summer of 1944. He retired from the Air Force in 1966 as a colonel, a rank that many believed was far below what his wartime contributions deserved. He died in 1994, remembered by aviation historians but largely unknown to the general public. And then there was Alexander Kartveli, the quiet Georgian who started everything. After the war, Kartveli continued designing aircraft for Republic Aviation. He led the development of the F-84 Thunderjet, America's first operational jet-powered fighter bomber, and the F-105 Thunderchief, the aircraft that would carry the heaviest bomb loads in the Vietnam War. Every machine he built carried the same philosophy he had embedded in the P-47 survive, endure, deliver, overwhelming force. He never sought fame. He gave almost no interviews. He published no memoirs. When Republic Aviation was absorbed by Fairchild, in 1965, Kartveli retired from the company he had served for over 3 decades. He died on July 20th, 1974 in New York City, at the age of 78. There was no state funeral, no presidential tribute. The man who designed the fighter that helped win the air war over Europe passed from the world, as quietly as he had lived in it. But his legacy was never about monuments or medals. It was about what he left behind in steel and fire, and the principles that outlived every aircraft he ever drew. The P-47 Thunderbolt flew its last combat missions in 1945, but the ideas embedded in its design never stopped flying. Kartveli's core philosophy that a fighter should be built around its engine, that survivability matters more than agility, that massive firepower delivered in a single pass is more decisive than prolonged maneuvering, became the foundation of American tactical air power for the next 80 years. The F-84 Thunderjet carried that philosophy into Korea, where it flew over 86,000 sorties and delivered more ordnance than any other United Nations aircraft in the conflict. The F-105 Thunderchief carried it into Vietnam, where it bore the heaviest burden of the Rolling Thunder campaign, flying more strike missions over North Vietnam than any other American aircraft, and suffering losses that echoed the grim early days of the P-47 in 1943. And when the Air Force designed the A-10 Thunderbolt II in the 1970s, the aircraft that would become the most beloved close air support weapon in modern military history, the designers explicitly named it after Kartveli's original creation. The A-10 carries the same DNA, a massive gun built around an airframe, twin engines designed to survive ground fire, redundant flight controls, self-sealing fuel tanks, a titanium bathtub protecting the pilot from anti-aircraft rounds. It is the P-47's grandchild, and it proves that the philosophy Kartveli established in 1940 remains as relevant in the 21st century as it was over the hedgerows of Normandy. The total statistical legacy of the P-47 is staggering by any measure. Across all theaters, Thunderbolts flew over 546,000 combat sorties, more than any other American fighter in World War II. They dropped 132,000 tons of bombs, fired over 135 million rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, and destroyed an estimated 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railroad cars, and 68,000 motor vehicles. In aerial combat, P-47 pilots claimed 3,752 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air and another 315 on the ground. The total production run of 15,686 aircraft made it the most produced American fighter of the war. These numbers represent something beyond military statistics. They represent the industrial philosophy that Cartvelli and the American war machine embodied. Not the brilliance of a single ace or the perfection of a single design, but the relentless, sustained, overwhelming application of power across every front every day for years on end. It was not elegant, it was not romantic, but it worked. And it worked on a scale that no other nation on Earth could match. But the deepest lesson of the P-47 Thunderbolt is not about engines or guns or production numbers. It is about the nature of innovation itself, and the institutional forces that nearly killed it before it could prove its worth. Consider the pattern. Cartvelli proposes a fighter that violates every conventional rule of design. The aviation establishment reacts with skepticism. Training accidents nearly cancel the program. Early combat results seem to confirm the doubters. Institutional resistance prevents commanders from using the aircraft effectively. It takes stubborn individuals, Zemke Kepner Doolittle, fighting their own bureaucracies to unlock the weapon's true potential. This pattern is not unique to the P-47. It is the story of almost every transformative military innovation in history. When Billy Mitchell argued in the 1920s that aircraft could sink battleships, the Navy brass court-martialed him. When Hugh Dowding built the radar-based fighter defense system that saved Britain in 1940, the Air Ministry tried to remove him from command before the Battle of Britain even started. When Hyman Rickover proposed nuclear-powered submarines in the late 1940s, the naval establishment resisted for years before the USS Nautilus proved him right. The pattern repeats because institutions are designed to preserve what works, not to gamble on what might work. The men who rejected Cartvelli's design, who laughed at the 7-ton fighter, who insisted on close escort doctrine while bomber crews died by the hundreds, were not stupid. They were operating within a system that rewards caution and punishes failure. Breaking through that system requires not just a good idea, but individuals willing to risk their careers, their reputations, and sometimes their lives to prove it. Today, the same dynamic plays out in every military organization, every corporation, every government on Earth. Somewhere right now, an engineer with an unconventional idea is being told it will never work. A field commander with a better tactic is being ordered to follow the approved doctrine. A designer with a radical concept is watching it die in a committee meeting. The lesson of the Thunderbolt is not that institutions are always wrong. It is that the most important innovations often look ridiculous at first. And the difference between a forgotten failure and a war-winning weapon is frequently nothing more than the stubbornness of a few individuals who refuse to stop believing in what they built. And there is one final detail that most people have never heard. In 1945, when American forces overran the Luftwaffe's research facilities at Relentless and Göttingen, intelligence officers discovered something extraordinary buried in the classified German assessment files. The Luftwaffe's own engineering evaluation division had conducted a detailed study of the P-47 Thunderbolt based on captured examples, downed aircraft reconstructed from wreckage, and extensive pilot debriefings. The report, completed in late 1944, ran to over 200 pages. Its conclusions shocked the American officers who translated it. The German engineers acknowledged that the P-47's turbocharger system was superior to anything the Luftwaffe possessed. They admitted that the airframe's structural integrity exceeded German design standards by a factor they described as remarkable. They noted that the 8-gun armament package delivered a weight of fire that no German single-engine fighter could match. And buried in the final section in language that carried the unmistakable tone of professional admiration, from men who understood that they were describing the weapon that had destroyed their air force. The German evaluators wrote that the P-47 represented, in their assessment, the most effective single-engine fighter-bomber produced by any nation during the war. The aircraft that every Luftwaffe pilot had laughed at in 1943 had earned the highest possible compliment from the engineers of the nation it helped defeat. The enemy had studied it, analyzed it, tested it against every standard they possessed, and concluded that the joke was on them. Alexander Kartveli never saw that report. He never knew that the men who built Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs had looked at his creation and acknowledged it as the best of its kind. He simply continued doing what he had always done, designing, building, solving problems that other people said could not be solved. From a Georgian immigrant with a suitcase full of blueprints that everyone called insane, to a 7-ton machine that flew 546,000 combat sorties, destroyed over 9,000 enemy aircraft, and helped break the Luftwaffe over the skies of Europe. From a fighter that pilots called the flying milk bottle, to a weapon that German soldiers called their worst nightmare. From an idea rejected by generals, mocked by allies, and nearly killed by its own training accidents, to the most produced American fighter of World War II, and the spiritual ancestor of every close air support aircraft flying today. Alexander Kartveli Hub, Zemke, Robert Johnson, Francis Gabreski, and the 15,000 men and women who built those Thunderbolts on factory floors in New York and Indiana proved something that transcends any single war or any single weapon. They proved that the ideas the world laughs at hardest are sometimes the ideas the world needs most. And that strength, real strength, is not found in what looks graceful or elegant or easy. It is found in what endures. The next time you hear an idea dismissed as too heavy, too slow, too big, too crazy, too impossible, remember the P-47 Thunderbolt. Remember that 7 tons of American steel and stubbornness once changed the course of the greatest war in human history. And remember that somewhere, in a quiet office or a crowded factory floor, or a dusty airfield at the edge of the world, the next ridiculous idea is waiting for someone brave enough to believe in it. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that the craziest ideas are often the ones that matter most. And if you want to hear more stories of impossible innovations that changed the world, stories that history books forgot, and that the people who lived them never got to tell, then stay with this channel. Because World War II produced hundreds of ideas that were called insane before they became indispensable. And we are just getting started. The Thunderbolt is silent now. Its guns are cold, its engine is still. But the thunder it left behind has never stopped echoing. And if you listen carefully, you can still hear it rolling across the years, reminding us what happens when ordinary people refuse to believe that the impossible is anything more than a dare.